3 minutes or to 5 of policy think tanking in Kenya. I met Professor Nyong'o, I think, in 1992. I was a young economist at the World Bank, and he was then part of a group called the Young Turks. But I was much younger than him. I was sought out and introduced to him by a mutual friend. His name is Robert Shaw. He was then Secretary for Policy, Ford. The purpose was to put together an idea, come from Professor Nyong'o, to prepare a policy compendium to help the opposition, which was then very new in Kenya, to be able to write manifestos. You can imagine, we hadn't had an opposition for maybe since a couple of years after independence, and the opposition was expected, or we expected the opposition to compete on basis of ideas. So Professor Nyong'o came up with this idea of putting together a compendium of policy ideas around which the opposition, a resource book, so to speak. It was called the Post-Election Action Program. I recall that by the time we were launching the PEEP, the opposition had kind of fragmented. We launched the report at Serena, and the only opposition leader who showed up was Jaramogi. So it kind of then got to be associated a bit with Ford Kenya. Anyway, PEEP gave birth to the Institute of Economic Affairs, which I had a little time before I went back to school, so I volunteered to help Professor set it up. So I spent the month of July, I think August, and a bit of September of 1993 setting up the IEA, of which Prof became chair. And then the IEA became the center of economic think tanking in the country, did many, many things. I think before I left, in those couple of months, we updated the PEEP in a report called Agenda Something. I then came back a bit later. It had run into headwinds. We found Betty Minor with the Prof and some friends. She took over, did a report called Our Problems, Our Solutions. Then a young man called Arthur Muliro showed up. He helped us to do a project which called the Kenya Scenarios Project in the late 90s, brought together a lot of people. He also started in the process, because IEA was conceived to support the political opposition, particularly in parliament. We then started a parliamentary strengthening program, which ultimately was adopted by parliament. And did a lot of things, advocated for strengthening parliamentary oversight of the budget, pushed through a law called the Fiscal Management Act, together with the late Olo Aringo and many other people. So, and on and on and on. So I don't want to bore you with the politics of it, from Ford to Ford Kenya, to something called Mwangaza Trust, which we've traveled with Prof here, which, by the way, Prof, I still have the trust deed in my house, to SDP, and SDP is how we ended up in NAC, with the Prof and a couple of other people, some politicians who are now in all types of political formations. And NAC is how Prof became the Minister for Economic Planning from SDP. Incidentally, the idea of free primary education that was implemented by NAC came from SDP's manifesto. So when NAC came into office, Prof became Minister for ERS, for planning, and he invited yours truly, together with another gentleman, the late Harry Mula, so he's a dear friend of ours, and a young man called Caleb Opon, to do something we call the Economic Recovery Strategy. The idea behind the Economic Recovery Strategy was a turnaround plan for the economy for 3 years, And then that, as we were implementing that, we would then be developing a long-term vision, development vision for Kenya, which we now call Vision 2030. Of course, NAC also ran into headwinds of sorts, and by the time that first term was ending, you had the electoral referendum, and all sorts of other things. I think the rest is fairly recent history. But of course, many of the ideas, if you go into many of the ideas today that are still informing policy, and you do an audit, you will find them in the PEEP, you will find them in those reports that we were doing those days. You will, of course, find them in the ERS and the many contributions that went into it. And you will find them, in fact, going way back. Because when you look at those ideas, you will find that they are the same issues that have too much concentration of economic power and resources in a few hands. You will find that discussion in a report done by the NCCK in 1967 called Who Controls Industry in Kenya. It was banned, but you can still find it. The challenge of employment, equitable growth, poverty, ILO report 1972. The challenge of rapidly growing population and creating jobs. How do you distribute, or how do you allocate capital so that it creates jobs for rapidly growing population? Session of paper number 1 of 1986. And you go in all those ideas, you will find they're there. So why do we have so many ideas discussing the same things, and we will be discussing the same things over the next several months for a new vision? I think the most important lesson I have learned from this business of think tanking is that the most important output of think tanks is not ideas, it is people. People are the most important output. What do I mean by people? I mean the people who take part in these exercises. You might call them vision carriers, who then come from those processes with certain world view about the country. I can see Prof. Smoking there. He was one of the early think tankers in the governance space with something called Clarion. It used to make a lot of noise on corruption and such things, and you can see where he is. So these people, a critical mass of people who are always seized of the question, how can our country do better? You keep asking yourself, surely, how can our country do better? And the more of those people that you have, the more likely that a country can move towards a consensus on development. So, I am very delighted that Prof has not let go of that. That even now, as he completes his term of governor, he is asking himself, how can our country do better? And he's asking himself, what do I do next? I think he's put together his team. so that we can all ask ourselves, and now in a much more pluralistic sense, when we were doing that, we were very few when we started out. We would probably be in a group of no more than 10, 15 people. But now the whole country appreciates the importance of participating in the process of thinking about how to make our country do better. So, Prof, thank you very much